So welcome everyone again, and thank you for joining this session. We are going to, since you already have received a fair amount of information about the review process and the review criteria, we're planning to hold this session as an open Q&A session to really just answer any questions that you have. And due to the number of participants, we're going to ask that you put your questions into the chat rather than raising your hand and asking questions. We would love to be able to interact with you directly, but just in the interest of time and being able to get through more questions, we're going to ask that you put it in the chat, and we will do our best to answer all the questions. Hopefully we'll get through to as many of them as possible. We also would ask, we don't have a Q&A feature, unfortunately, in this Zoom room. So what we also request is that you don't have additional kind of side conversations in the chat, just so that we can more easily capture the questions. So we'll start out here with just giving you a few moments to just start putting your questions in. Okay, great. You're coming in quickly. That's good. Okay. So I think we can just get started right away, right, Becky?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump right in.
All right.
So our first question is, can an organization be a lead and be a partner in another proposal, whether it's a type 1 or a type 2?
So the answer to that is yes. So you can only be a lead on one, as we have stated, either a type 1 or type 2, and the lead, there's that strict limit, but being a partner, there's no limit on that.
All right, so is the funding duration 2 years or up to 2 years for a type 1 proposal?
Right, so we say that it is up to 2 years. If you wanted to request for it to be shorter, you can. We would expect that most teams would benefit from 2 years, so it's you can request shorter if you want to, but it's not a strict requirement of it having to be 24 months. But what's typical when we say up to 2 years is most of the time people will put that maximum length of time, but again, you don't have to.
Okay, so we're getting lots of questions, so that's fantastic. I'm going to kind of prioritize questions that are really around the review criteria first. So here's a question: are there any review ramifications of another concept PI, principal applicant, being listed as a core partner in our submission? So this would be someone who's the lead on something else.
Okay, so can you be the lead somewhere and then be a core partner somewhere else on another proposal?
If you put someone who's a lead elsewhere onto your proposal, are there any ramifications of that?
Right, so that is a good question. We understand why teams might do that, and that may be an approach that could make sense. Ultimately, if your proposal is reviewed favorably and you get through and there's an award made, then that might be the place where maybe there would be, or actually really when the NSF Engines team is then looking at the set of proposals, there may be questions that come up around that of, can an individual really devote time to both of these, right? If both of them are type 1, can they really help to build both? So it's up to you whether you want to do it. In that case, we probably would go to the teams and, ask them what they want to do. But that is allowable.
Okay, so should a type 1 proposal outline the engine's structure as defined in section C2, which I need to find? Or will the structure really be created during the planning year, so it does not need to be included in the proposal? Or a mix of both?
So I'm not sure what C2
Yeah.
is.
Okay, I will look up C2 and we'll get back to that. The presented information made it seem as if type 1 needs to have their fully fleshed out plan when they submit. However, that seems contrary to the purpose of a planning grant. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
So the fully fleshed out plan. So, right, so that is a really good question, right? And that's really where a lot of the assessment, I think, comes in from the panel of, are enough pieces in place? So what we really want you to do, and what the reviewers are going to want to do, is that you have described which pieces are far along, so that it is believable that you have, maybe an initial set of core partners in place. You have an idea around what your topic area is and why it's motivated by the region. So there's going to be these elements that you're going to be further along, but you need to also make it very clear what else needs to be accomplished during the planning phase, right? So why are you submitting for a development? Why do you think you're in the development stage? Why are you submitting for a type 1 versus a type 2? It's clearly because you have certain gaps that you're trying to fill and fill out during that planning stage, during your type 1 award. And so that's where that idea that the reviewers, the mock panelists are bringing up about the benchmarking and identifying the gaps, that's where that comes in. And we were talking about really being honest about, here's where our team is and here's what we need to fill in. I don't know, Becky, if you want to say anything more about that.
No, I think
okay.
That was thorough.
Okay.
So I am looking, so in the BAA section, in the program description, section C is engine leadership and organization structure, and C2 refers to organization and management. So really, I think the question is very related to what we were just addressing, is how much of that needs to be included in a plan 1 versus isn't that what we're supposed to be doing in a plan 1, in a type 1, sorry.
Right. So I guess I'll just say a little bit more about that. Maybe you haven't figured out exactly who your CEO should actually be in the engine, and you could still be recruiting for that. But maybe you would be changing your lead from the type 1 to the type 2. But you do need to have certain pieces in place, right? You're trying to show that there is a team there that you can work with. There's resources there. There's pieces there that you can build on. Okay, I'll stop there.
Great. How many letters of collaboration can we include in our proposal package?
I think we do state a limit.
I do too.
And it may be 20. I'm
looking. Letters of collaboration. There is no limitation on the number of letters of collaboration.
Okay.
There you go.
So there is no limit, but what I do want to say about it is that just keep in mind the difference between a letter of collaboration and a letter of support. So if you are including a letter of collaboration, what this means is that there is a clear role for those collaborators. It's not an endorsement. You have clearly stated within the project description, maybe in the budget, maybe it's in facilities, what they are contributing, and made a case for why they are part of your proposed engine or your proposed plans for an engine. So if you put in there, 50 letters of collaboration and you're applying for a type 1, you have to ask yourself, actually going back to this question about thinking from the perspective of the reviewer, if you were a reviewer, would you believe that? So are there resources to support those 50 organizations? Do they have a clear plan? Are they part of the voice of the engine? What are they actually contributing? And part of how you might be able to figure out as well, how believable it is in part that we give space within the letter of collaboration. You can actually put details. We really want you to include details about what the role is, what the resources would be that from those collaborators. And so if you're having a hard time filling that out, then that might be maybe a first indication that they might not really be a clear collaborator to include that would really strengthen your proposal.
Great. What degree of specifics is expected for the technology that will be advanced in the proposal stage for a type 2?
What degree of specificity? Let's see. That's a difficult question to answer. So we'll try to give some answers, but this is actually, again, where if you kind of get your own inside reviewers from your region to look at your proposal and see if they understand what the technologies are that you're claiming to advance, that might be one way to figure out if you are putting enough space in your proposal, giving enough space in your proposal to that section. And, part of what you're going to want to do is really make a case for probably a range of technologies at sort of a range of readiness levels. So some that are probably ready for real translation, maybe even for startups, and where you can really see that you can build that innovation ecosystem out of it. And others that might fit a little bit more into kind of that idea of really why we're calling this an engine and that use-inspired piece and the exploration that's needed. You'd also really want to make a case there for, for the gaps of what this technology is filling. You need to some extent satisfy the experts and but also make it understandable. But sort of what I think is really being asked here is how much real estate should be used on this. And that is not a question that we can give a straight answer to. You really have to look at your whole proposal. So it's going to be a little bit unsatisfying, the answer.
All right. So what level of maturity is reasonable for the submission, given this, for the submission date, for the goals and metrics of a type 1, since they're going to be co-developed with the partners? So let me rephrase that. So in terms of what they want to include about goals and like metrics for success and such for a type 1, how much of that needs to be fleshed out in a type 1, given that they want to co-create that with their partners, and part of what they're going to do in a type 1 is establish those partners?
Maybe Becky, you might actually have a good response to this one.
Yeah, so I think that the expectation for a type 1 is still that you have a core leadership team of partners, right? You have some initial set of folks that are more diverse than just, say, your institution. It's not just one lead organization and nobody else. So I think there can be initial decisions made about, what success looks like, what sorts of metrics you're thinking about, identifying the benchmarks to demonstrate that you understand where your region is, And then make it clear in the proposal and in that evaluation plan that you're going to flesh that out, right, as your engine develops and grows. But I do think that you'll have enough folks at the outset that you should be able to start framing out what some of the key indicators that you're interested in exploring would look like. We do view evaluation as something that is going to develop even for the type 2s as they progress, you know, in the first several months of the award. But I don't think you want to dismiss it just because you want to bring your you know, you want to get all your partners on board. I think your core team can still really lay the foundation for an evaluation plan.
Yeah, I guess I would also add in there that if you can describe what is your plan for actually putting together an evaluation plan and figuring out these metrics. So maybe that, you know, that might be one of the areas that is a gap for your team. And again, that's okay to note that, but if you're bringing the groups on board, the individuals on board who can help you figure that out, and you're showing that you have put some thought into it, then that probably would, you know, would be viewed at least somewhat favorably, at least by some reviewers.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of questions around when, like, how many proposals or how many awards are likely to be made for type 1s, for type 2s, when the next round of type 2s are going to be awarded, given the CHIPS Act that just passed, what are the implications? So maybe we can just sort of generally talk about this stuff and then, you know, as one collective discussion here.
Sure. Okay, so some of it we can answer very easily. We have already stated publicly that for type 1, we're expecting to make around 50 awards. For type 2, in this first round, we are expecting to make 5. And we certainly do expect there to be another round, as was insinuated by this question. When that would be, what the deadline is for, you know, for the type 2, what the deadline is for, or when another round would be announced, and how many would be at that point, and how much money is available. Those are all pieces. Some of this is fluid, and we will be making announcements as the decisions are made.
Great. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can consolidate some of these questions here. It does seem like we do have a lot of questions on more guidance around the type 1s. There are several questions that suggest that they felt like the panel discussion really spoke to type 2s, and the fact that a type 1 is planning, getting some clarity around what would be expected for a planning grant compared to that type 2. So these are kind of broad questions, so I don't know.
Right.
How we can tackle that.
Yeah, so we can maybe make some headway in addressing that. Okay, so for the first thing I would say here is that one of the pieces that you know, that reviewers are going to be looking for is whether the proposed region should actually be submitting for a type 1, right? So have they made a case that they are actually a type 1, or should they have really submitted for a type 2? So we're, you know, really trying to promote and accelerate innovation in places that are, you know, haven't been able to do that on their own. So I guess the reason I'm saying this is that trying to point to what the gaps are in your effort is really going to go a long way in making a, putting together a successful Type 1 proposal. So really the biggest pieces that I would say are, you want to show that there is real interest from your region, right? So you have brought together some of it's not just a, you know, a couple of institutions, but you've really brought together some of the key partners who are showing that they really want this to become an innovation ecosystem. And that you've made a case that the direction you're going, even if you need to still flesh out some of what what kind of the focus would be, that you're headed in a direction that really makes sense for that region, and that you're pulling in the various, that you've made your region the right size, that you can pull in the different types of expertise that would be needed to really build the engine. So just keep in mind, when we're talking about the planning, we are not asking for there to be, you know, we say planning versus execution. So we're not looking, you know, for you to you know, be actually creating startups. That would not really be what we would want you to do in a Type 1, right? So you're really trying to, you know, essentially focus on that ecosystem and bringing everyone together and making a case that you have the right people at the table to have a strong foundation to start planning that ecosystem. I'm not sure how much that answered it.
I think that's good. I think it's helpful, Michal, just to let folks see how you're thinking through this. You know, because there is no, as you mentioned earlier today, there is no one right way to do something, right? So we're doing our best to kind of give some insights here. Here's a good question. So how will reviewers look at the regions of service? Will they look kindly on the blending of proposers with similar topics that are geographically very distant? It would mean more than one region of service in a single proposal. So I think this is getting to our encouragement that proposers maybe consider coalescing. And what about doing it around a common topic rather than those in a common region? Right.
So both of those approaches may make sense, right? The goal of this program is really to bring innovation to regions, right? Where there isn't enough kind of investment in that certain region. So if you combine two areas that are not geographically connected, but both of them are working on a similar topic area, and you're making a case that you have complementary skills, and together you can really help strengthen both of those regions, then that could make sense. But something that we really want to try to avoid, and that I think we all know happens with the current innovation ecosystems that are strong right now, is that there's really great startups and innovation that happens in one part of the country, and then one of those existing ecosystems pulls in that talent and that startup, and all of a sudden there's, you know, a brain drain, and the actual benefit no longer is seen in that initial place where it was developed. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'll stop there and see, Becky, if you want to say anything else.
No, I think I would just emphasize that, you know, one of the major goals of the Engine program is to develop these regional ecosystems. And so the idea is that the goals of the Engine are going to develop the regional economy, right? And so it would really require being able to build a case that you can do that in two different locations, that the outputs of that engine are really contributing to two geographic locations in a way that is genuinely developing those regions. That may be challenging to try to do. and prevent what Mihal was talking about there with the brain drain. Okay, let's move on to another question. Sorry. Both a regional need as well as existing regional assets are included as reasons for why an engine might be a strong contender. Are either one of these cared about or evaluated more strongly than the other?
So one was regional needs and the other one
is needs and one is assets, right? So if you have a lot of needs or you have a lot of assets, how does that play off of each other?
Right. I mean, that's a nuanced kind of question. So I guess I would go back again that if you don't have the assets in your region, or you don't have a way of pulling in the assets, then I think it would probably be kind of broadly recognized that if you kind of don't have those foundational pieces, it's going to be hard to build something out of it. So somehow you need to figure out how you're getting those assets, whether they are directly in your region or maybe it's through a partnership that's in another location. But kind of that balance is, you know, is a difficult question to answer in a theoretical sense. I'm not sure that we can answer that anymore. I think this would be another clear one where you're asking, you know, would you value this more or this more? This kind of goes back to, you know, to this point of kind of getting your own reviewers to see if they believe your story.
Yeah, and I think maybe I would focus more on, have you accurately identified your assets and leveraged them effectively, and also recognized your gaps or your needs and have figured out a way to address those as well, right? Just understanding those and how are you responding to those is important. Someone asks, are there any elements proposers should consider that were not included today in the panel or throughout the day?
So certainly many elements that were not discussed in the panel. So in the interest of time, we only discussed 4 of the 7 review criteria. So we discussed the purpose and vision, regional importance and impact, partnerships and workforce development. The other 3 for type 1, leadership team, DEIA, well, that was discussed actually in another session, and the risk identification, adaptability, those are going to be equally important. And if you look at type 2, those are also equally important. So the reviewers will, I mean, maybe a good visual, what the reviewers will get is essentially a template that will be listing these various review criteria, and then they list the strengths and weaknesses for these different criteria, maybe in the context of intellectual merit and broader impacts, maybe not. And so all of these are going to be important pieces that we really feel help to identify whether a proposal and a team is really well suited for an award.
What should be the balance between education, roughly high school and earlier, and workforce development post high school and beyond?
So I don't know that we can answer about balance. But besides just thinking about post high school, I guess maybe it's implied in there that post high school and beyond also involves technicians and entrepreneurship and other aspects. I mean, I guess if you look at maybe the best way to think about it is if you look at the population of the region of service. So if you're living in an area that has a certain demographic, or, it could also be the certain ages or kind of certain needs. What you really want to do is you want your workforce development, just like the other pieces, to really make sense within the context of what you're trying to carry out in your region. So that balance is going to in large part be based on, what the goals are of your engine, what the demographics are of your region of service, what you're trying to accomplish. But really, both of those are going to be important, right? If you're really trying to build an ecosystem, maybe more so for type 2 than for type 1, we recognize you can't do everything in a type 1. It's 2 years and $1 million.
And Michal, maybe you would disagree with me here, but I guess I would go back to what Susan was saying earlier today, that you can't do it all. So all of this is definitely important. But you're going to have to come up with, where are you going to start making real impactful inroads in workforce development? And the reality is, if you try to, I would imagine that a panel would look at a proposal that at a high level tries to tackle every single K through 30 and say, we're going to do all of this, wondering if you're going to actually end up doing any of it. So you're going to have to recognize that, yes, all of those levels are important, but what makes the most sense for your region, for what you should be doing out of the gate? And are you doing that in a way that's going to make the right kind of impacts and set you up so that you can then tackle other aspects of the workforce pipeline as your engine and your ecosystem matures?
Yes. I guess, right. I would agree with that also, right? It's right sizing it for the time, for the budget, for the number of people involved, and the reviewers and NSF realize that there are these real constraints,
right?
And there are questions. If you're trying to do too much that doesn't seem realistic, then that is certainly seen as a weakness.
So what is the balance on plans for the full 10 years of a type 2? How much detail is needed for, say, years 5 through 10?
So I think that there's certainly a recognition that the earlier years, that there's going to be, it's an evolution, what you're going to be describing. So you're trying to make a case for why this is something, where could you see the engine and the region being in 10 years? But then, how are you going to get there? There's certainly going to be much more detail in the earlier part. Even in the budget, we really request only a detailed budget for every 2 years. And we realize that this is an ongoing process. This is really the reason that we're structuring it as a cooperative agreement, because there needs to be that ongoing discussion with NSF. There needs to be ongoing evaluation. This has to evolve, otherwise it's not actually going to accomplish the goals. So certainly much more detail in the earlier years, but really just sort of that vision for the longer term.
How is the weighing of giving preference to proposals for regions that are traditionally underrepresented accomplished compared to those from stronger regions?
Okay, so I guess I would say that, sort of broadly, we would be looking, for a portfolio approach, not in terms of kind of where different teams are and where regions are, because even the ones that are more mature might have reasons why this would really help to accelerate their region. And it could be that they're bringing in different demographics or focusing on a new topic area. So it's really about making that case for why these additional funds will be beneficial if you're further along. But we're not throwing out any area. The one piece to consider again is if you're trying to apply for a type 2 and you're not really in that, you're much further along, or a type 1 and you're not, you're much further along and really well developed, then you can consider that there's going to be lots of questions about why are you applying? Why did you apply for a type 1? Why didn't you go for a type 2?
So this sort of related. So during the general session, it was stated that applications will be compared to others in the same region. Can you describe what the regions are that will serve as this parameter?
Okay. Right. So the reason why we stated that is this actually in large part goes back to a conflicts of interest issue. We're going to need a lot of reviewers to review the very large set of proposals. And so people in certain regions, if you're in a given region, however we decide to break that apart, the pots of money are essentially going to be broken out into different parts of the country. We have not put the boundaries around that. In part, it's going to be based on what comes in and various issues that our team will need to figure out internally. But if you're from one region, however we define that, you will not be able to review proposals in that set, but you would be able to review in another set. And, we're going to really need to pull on experts, as we kind of demonstrated, from lots of different types of expertise. And if we eliminate the ability of people who are applying for the program to also be reviewers, we're going to have a very challenging time reviewing the proposal. So this is something that's commonly done at NSF. We work out with our policy office what the boundaries are and kind of what's allowable to create a fair process.
Right. So it's really less about your proposals and your regions of service and more about us being able to fairly staff panels, really. Are monetary and like kind contributions allowed, and do they need to be shown in a type 1 budget? Similar question around cost share, and another question around should monetary resources be included in letters of collaboration?
Okay, do you want to take the first stab at that one?
I will try, but I will let you add in. So we do want to see resources and personnel efforts discussed in the letters of collaboration, even in the narrative if it's appropriate. So NSF does not allow cost sharing, and so there wouldn't be any specific cost sharing in a budget. But sharing of resources, things like that, for sure. I don't know, Michal, do you want to get into more detail here? I don't want to get too far.
Yeah, so I think, if you have really detailed questions related to the budget, then you actually could join that session that's on the budgeting process.
Or watch the video.
Yes. But I think that we have also, a couple of other places where you could talk about the resources would be in the letters of collaboration. It could be in the facilities section, and to a certain extent in the project description.
Great. We submitted a phase 1 as a for-profit, but after today feel a new nonprofit might be a better vehicle. Can we change our submission to a newly formed entity, or is it better to make creating a new nonprofit as a milestone? So I guess what I maybe we should talk about here is if you're looking to change who submits your proposal, and that, maybe you could talk about that in terms of who was the lead on your concept outline versus.
Right. So it is allowable to change the lead to someone else. Whoever submitted it does need to still be part of the proposal, but they do not need to be the lead. And what type of organization, there isn't a preference. We've structured it in this way with really being open-ended, because we heard in our planning process that giving as much flexibility as we could for many different aspects of the engines and the planning is really what would help this succeed. And so it's not going to be viewed more favorably to do one or the other. It's really going to be a matter of making a case for why that specific organization makes sense as the lead. Now, I don't know if that was for submitting a type 1 or type 2.
Didn't say.
Okay, but either way, one of the pieces to just consider is if you create a new organization, do you have all the processes in place to be able to accept the funds?
And so there are a few other questions that have come in that are really about a little bit more in the weeds than I think we need to get into on how far along in the process of standing up a 501c3 do you need to be before you can apply, in terms of how the IRS designates you. And I think if you've got those sorts of questions, I really recommend emailing us at the Engines alias, coming to an office hours, but providing us enough specific information so that we can elevate those to the experts at NSF in our legal office and our policy office, that we can make sure we get you the right information rather than just kind of giving you a general answer here today. And Michal, could you drop the Engines email in the chat for everyone? I guess we're not supposed to be adding to the chat, but I think we can. We still have a fair number of questions here, and I'm not sure when we're supposed to wrap up. Each team is likely to have a relatively large number of leaders from academia, nonprofits, for-profits, government. Are we still subject to the limit of up to 5 PIs and co-PIs that are recognized on the cover page?
So what is the limit on the number of PIs and co-PIs?
In their question, they've said 5. And that does sound familiar, but I don't know if that's.
Yeah, we'd have to look at what that is. I know there were discussions at different points, and I'm not sure.
I mean, if it is stated in the BAA as something that is required for your proposal, then that is the guideline. But I don't want to spend too much time with us double checking the document.
Right. So if you're not able to find that in the the BAA and still have that question, then we will get back to people on that if that's not clearly stated somewhere.
Venture capital is very regional in the U.S. Located, Silicon Valley, for example, East Coast. Is it anticipated VC collaborators will not be regional to the engines for type 2s? Finding experienced VC partners with sizable funds may be challenging in certain parts of the country.
Again, this is one of these questions on if you have a partnership, if you have extra resources that's coming from another location, that's fine. So that's allowed. The core partners, the lead and the core partner have to be within the region of service. The other partners, or if there's other resources, that does not need to come from the region of service. But what we do want to see, and what we state in the BAA, is that the benefits and the regional economic development, the ecosystem, needs to all be essentially in service and with the goal of helping what you have defined as your region of service.
Yeah, that's key to keep in mind, that we would expect that if you have a certain expertise, skill set that's lacking in your region, that you want to bring in partners from other regions to help provide that expertise. the key is just that the benefit has to be going to the region, right? When are our office hours? How do you schedule an appointment? We will be announcing that soon through our website. I'm not sure exactly when, but that will be made available on the Engines website. You can follow the links and sign up through there. Someone asked, can you change from a type 1 to a type 2?
I believe the answer is no.
Yeah, you can, if you're in a type 2 and you've decided that you were overzealous and you're really more of a type 1, you can. If you got a concept outline approved for a type 1, you can't apply as a type 2.
So we did try to message that prior to submission of the concept outlines, and we did wrestle with that as a team, but we decided in the interest of fairness that there was more content required for the type 2s, and those would be scrutinized more. That if anyone wanted to apply, if they weren't sure, then they should apply for a type 2.
If a type 2 proposer recognizes overlap among a type 1 proposal within its region, would it be allowable to partner with type 2? Allowable to include type 1 planning grant activities as a funded activity in the type 2 scope of work?
Well, I would not suggest doing that. I think what the region, I think this is an excellent question, actually. And this is part of, this is actually a big reason why we have published, you know, the summaries of these concept outlines, so that you can make those connections and see who else is out there and what ideas they have, and hopefully, again, work together. So if you have a type 1 and a type 2, the question would be, well, which one is your region? Should you really be applying for a type 1 or a type 2? So in that case, that is actually where it could make a lot of sense for you to talk, see if the teams, you know, have the ability to work together, have the interest to work together, and then figure out together which type of proposal would make sense to go for. Now, I will say, you know, there will be activities for the type 1s that are awarded. Maybe some of those will then decide to work together, you know, once they're awarded. But anyway, but back to this question, that's what I would say.
Another couple of questions about the CHIPS Act. That was not an appropriations bill, so that you know, we're still waiting on that. Someone has asked for a copy of the review template for their own red team review. I would just recommend that you use the review criteria just like we did, because that is what our reviewers will be prompted to address.
And to be really concrete, I'll just say a few more words about that, right? Is if you want to put together your own review criteria, what you can do, we don't have the exact format yet, but essentially what you want to just consider are the strengths and weaknesses of each of those review criteria. And you probably want to consider them in the context of what is intellectual merit. What are the strengths and weaknesses in terms of intellectual merit for that review criteria? Does it make sense to also consider the broader impact strengths and weaknesses for that criteria? And other pieces maybe that are outside of that as well.
Great. All right, so we are going to have to wrap up it at 15 till. So we have a few more minutes. Okay, so there's no down select. We've addressed that. So the same person, the person who is asking about the 501c3, email me directly at rshirma@nsf.gov, and I'll make sure that gets elevated. Is there a side-by-side of the 7 criteria? Here's how type 1 should interpret them. Here's how type 2 should interpret them.
So we have some differences in the review criteria between, if you look in the BAA, there's a set that's listed for type 1, and there's some pieces that are the same and some different for type 2. How you interpret them was actually what we were trying to get across in the mock panel, that we include there many questions to get you started, but really your team needs to think about, considering the perspective of industry, considering the perspective of nonprofits and community organizations and academia. How would you interpret them? So we gave you a lot of ideas of how to get started. But the next step is for you, again, to take people on your team, and hopefully some people who have actually not been part of the process directly in putting this together, and to wrestle with those questions. Look at, on paper, what have you put down in your proposal? So hopefully give them a draft and go through that same process. How would you interpret this question? Where am I looking for these, where can I see evidence of the strengths and weaknesses within this draft in those areas? That may not be so satisfying, but that is truly what the panels are like. And that's what's going to happen. And you need to, just consider that this is not just going to be academics. If you are more familiar with NSF, we really are going to be pulling from all these sectors who are putting together the proposals. So if you do that, that'll be like going through an initial review process on your own.
There were some questions around evaluation. We didn't touch on that today. Type 2s, we will have events prior to type 2 submission around evaluation, so that we will be providing more guidance there. Type 1s, we won't be able to provide more information before the deadline, but that's something that we plan to offer during the type 1 award phase. There are some people are asking for clarity around the type 1, type 2, moving from one to the other. That had to be decided at the time that the concept outlines were due. So we tried to clarify this to the community, that if you were submitting a type 2 and you were accepted as a type 2 because you provided, the 5 pages and extensive amount of information, we were comfortable with you moving forward and making the decision to submit a type 1, but because the type 1s had only 2 pages and did not have to provide information around partnerships, etc., in their type 1 concept outline, if they got approved for a type 1 concept outline, you wouldn't be able to then change your mind and go to submit a type 2 proposal. So unfortunately, you're kind of locked in there if you're a type 1 at this stage. Let me see, I'm just trying to.
Okay, I'll just answer a couple that I'm seeing over here really quickly. So there's a question about, can a national lab be the lead? So I'm going to actually extend that to the broader question of who is eligible to be the lead. So the answer for the national lab is no. But the reason for it, if you look under eligible applicants, then you can actually find the 3 really important pieces of information. Who can serve as a lead, who is eligible to receive funds, and who is not eligible to receive funds. In some cases, they can still be part of the they can be a partnership. There can be a partnership with them, but they cannot receive funds. So I would go to that section called eligible applicants.
Here's a question that may be appropriate for the wrap up, and I don't know that I have an answer to this, but how can we volunteer to be a reviewer in other regions?
That is a fantastic question. So we need to work that out. You know, a lot of these pieces, there's a lot of really fast moving pieces with this program. And so we don't want to speak, you know, ahead of speaking with the group. We would expect that we would be recruiting broadly, probably through some kind of questionnaire that you will be able to fill out, and we'll be sending that around broadly to get people who are willing to do it, and then we'll be vetting and actually you know, selecting the reviewers. But volunteering, it's probably going to be some kind of broad effort like that. And it's something we didn't get to earlier. So I actually very much appreciate that question. We will not be able to do this process if people do not volunteer. So thank you for bringing that up. And we hope that many people will volunteer to review for other regions. It's also a great way to see how the process works from the inside.
And that brings us to time. We didn't get to quite all the questions. I do encourage you to keep an eye out on the website for more office hours. And you can always email the Engines inbox. If we have been slow to get back to your responses, it is because between the day the concept outlines were due and today, we had a lot to get processed and very little time to do it. So be patient, but we are monitoring that mailbox, and we will respond to your questions.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.